Aha. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Koviki Talk. Koviki Talk is a 21 episode series where we talk about all things COVID-19, but from a PI perspective. So if we're talking about a vaccine, we're talking with Pacific Islander scientists and doctors. If we're talking about voting in a pandemic, and that's what we're going to talk about today, we are talking about it with Pacific Islanders. So you will hear about everything from Pacific Islanders. In different aspects of COVID-19. Today, we are here to talk about voting. We are 16 days out from, and they all get more important as we go. They're always the most important election in history, but this is one of the most important elections in history. So we have two guests with us today to help us through how to vote in a pandemic and what it means. Specifically to the PI community. So our first guest is Margarita Satini. She is known for her community work and social justice. She is a passionate community activist and an advocate for her Pacific Islander people and works towards bolstering civic engagement and participation within her community. In addition, Margarita has years of experience running political campaigns, conducting community lobbying training, and working in underrepresented and underserved communities. Margarita is also a community organizer for the Sierra Club, an environmental organization working with communities throughout Utah to shift the dependency on coal to generating renewable energy from alternative sources, working towards a just transition in extricative communities, fighting environmental racism, educating, and creating partnerships with communities most impacted by natural disasters. Margarita lives in Midvale, Utah with her partner James and has 4 adult children with 3 sons and 1 daughter and 4 grandkids. It's 3 grandsons and 1 granddaughter. Welcome, Rita.
Welcome, Rita.
Go ahead, Naki.
Manumalo is our next guest. Manumalo Ala Ilima is one of the co-founders for Utopia PDX with other QTPIs because we did not see ourselves reflected in the API community, the Pacific Islander community, and in the LGBTQ2SPIA plus community. I've been empowered to ensure a sacred space for our safety and well-being that has prevented our erasure. At the core, our ability to thrive in this society is predicated on the importance we seek as human beings that is fundamental to our very essence, that we have a right to our existence just as ourselves, however difficult that may be from the mainstream. Manumalo, thank you for joining us today.
So we're 16 days out from Election Day.
Oh,
and
Joseph on.
What's that?
Yay, Joseph, I seen Joseph sneak
Did
in.
you see Joseph?
He snuck in.
So well, then we're going to introduce Joseph too.
Go ahead.
He's in. Joseph
Yes, he's in.
Seia was born in Los Angeles, grew up in Tutuila and Upolu Islands with his Ainga in Samoa, and eventually emigrated to Duwamish Coast Salish territory with his father, Aitulangi Yosefa, and his siblings in 1994. He has 15 years of experience in direct service and youth development work, anti-racist community organizing, nonprofit leadership, and administration. Joseph champions systems change, work the centers, the leadership, and history of most impacted communities. He is committed to reducing and ending the impacts of systemic racism on the lives of Indigenous, Black, and Brown communities through coalition building, centering anti-racism, creating intergenerational leadership opportunities, and working with BIPOC communities to co-design our vision of beloved community. Joseph is Fa'afafine. He is a fierce advocate for QTBIPOC communities. He is critically concerned with political systems that cripple or erase the voice and leadership of NHPI communities, and will continue to provide soul labor in re-envisioning what it means for NHPI families to feel belonging and establish cultural home within the state of Washington. Welcome, Joseph Seia.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Yay.
All right, we have all guests in. Everybody's in the pool. This is for our panelists tonight. We're 16 days out from the election. At last count, I saw over 30 million mail-in ballots have been sent and collected. That is vastly ahead of 2016 in any election, really. 2018 had a huge turnout for a mid-year election, and now 2016 is or 2020 is way ahead of where 2016 was. So my question to the panelists, being 16 days away, do you think that the huge amount of mail-in ballots at this point is indicative of a record turnout, or do you think that it is mainly because of the pandemic? And let's go with Joseph because he just got here.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it's both, right? I think it's people being fed up and also just this strong sort of antagonism that has polarized our country. So whether it's for the good or for the bad, I think people want to make their political voice heard, and I think it's a good thing, that folks are coming out and voting and politicizing their stance. And so I feel very positive about it. And I'm hoping our millennials, I'm hoping, the folks that are traditionally are not voting are actually putting in their voice because it's that significant, right? And I don't think that was the case 4 years ago.
Right.
And so this is really exciting for me.
So do you think it's a record? Do you think this is going to be a record turnout for voter engagement?
Oh, yes, most definitely.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
How about you, Rita?
I really agree with Joseph. I really believe that this year especially is going to be a huge voter turnout. And specifically because it's one of the most divisive, one of the most vital, one of the most crucial elections in my lifetime, and probably in the lifetime of many others. And I don't speak solely just for myself. I know this because I've spoken with so many people on the ground while I'm out doing voter registration. Like that's part of the work that we do with my coalition. And so I believe wholeheartedly that this year will be record-breaking turnout. One of the things I also know is that our millennials are far outweigh now the boomer demographic, and I would love to see the millennials come and hijack this election, because I know many of the millennials think and feel the way I do as far as my ideology and the things that I believe in. I would love to. I challenge any millennial out there who's listening to the show to come out strong and vote.
Right. Malo, how do you see this?
Well, I definitely think people will be getting out the vote, and it is going to be a high voter turnout. One of the reasons is that there are plenty of people that have been so incredibly dissatisfied and unhappy with how things have been handled during this pandemic. And one way for sure that we can change that is the leadership. We didn't have national leadership. We're still waiting on stimulus packages for many of our community members. Instead of voting on a stimulus package through the HEROES Act in the Senate, folks are trying to vote on a Supreme Court justice. I mean, let's talk about priorities. So I think when we think about voting, people are actually voting for the issues that impact them dearly, whether or not they'll have healthcare, whether or not they'll roll back more policies that safeguard your circumstance. So I think we'll also see a lot of swing voters that voted for Trump, in 2016, that are incredibly been let down by his lack of leadership. I think they're going to turn out and they are not going to vote for him. So on many levels, whether it's the millennials and older incumbent voters are changing their minds because they do not like what's happening right now, especially during the pandemic.
Thank you, Marlo. I would echo your thoughts. I think that there was a lot of indifference in 2016. I think there's far less indifference this year. I think that both sides are going to get out there and vote. I think that there's a lot of people that sat in the middle and just had indifference to it, and this is what we ended up with. So with that, from a PI perspective, each of you are working on it on your own labors in getting our group to vote, getting our community to vote, and talking about how much of a priority it is from a PI perspective. So I'll kind of turn it over to the panelists to talk about the specific areas that they're working in. And then through this whole thing, we want to just stress how important it is to vote. And I think we've already heard it a couple times, and we're only a few minutes in, just about how important it is to get out there and get involved. And to Rita's point, I think the young people are far more knowledgeable, at least than I was at 18, 19, 20, 21. This group of kids now are way more educated to the process. So it's exciting to see that they're not only getting engaged, they're informed with it too. So I'm going to turn it back over to the group. I'll go back to Rita if you want to talk about the specific work that you're doing and what your priority is right now with the whole let's get out and vote for the PI community.
So basically my focus is on Salt Lake County. It's all of Utah, but most of my focus has been really in Salt Lake County because that's where most of our Pacific Islander community reside. We have the largest Tongan community per capita in the nation here in Utah, and then we have the fourth largest Samoan community per capita here in Utah as well. So it's kind of like a mecca for Tonga. It's like 1 out of 4 Tongans live in Utah. And so, a lot of some of the misinformation is that an election happens every 4 years during the presidential election, and that's not the case. One of the things that we're trying to educate our community on is that there's an election every single year. Every single year there's an election, not every 4 years during the presidential election. You have to think about your legislators, your county council, your city council, your school districts, like every single year. And it is in your best interest to take a little bit of time to invest in the issues that surround your home, your city, your county, your state, because you want to make sure that the people that you're voting for and are championing the causes that are important to your family. And the only way that you can do that is through education, through having conversation, through talanoa sessions with your community. And so we are continuing to have these discussions with our community. We're also letting them know in the most easiest way possible how to register, how to check on your ballot, how to check on your registration. It's just really all about communication, constant talanoa with your community, and just continuing those efforts always.
Thank you, Rita. Joseph, why is it important for PIs to make sure their voice and their vote is heard? And what is your focus right now?
Yeah, man, Naki, that's a great question, and it's not an easy answer. When you think about Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, you think about a people that has been systematically erased, right? For all different reasons, right? Whether it's COFA status, U.S. national status, whether it's experiencing being undocumented from the islands of Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. Like, there's so many ways that we've been displaced, and you look at all of the health and social determinants that really what this country has communicated to Pacifica indigenous people is that your lives do not matter, right? And so the work is tremendous for us to really think about what does it mean for us to help our community feel like they have any belonging, right? Cultural belonging, not just a belonging in a way that individualism, promotes that sense of belonging through, capitalism, buying a house. Like those things are not the most important things for Pacific people, right? We know that our people cares about our languages, about our cultures, about our elders. They really care, about the wellness of our collective communities. And so I think this is the work now, and the work that our ancestors have given to us is how do you continue to build those relationships, build a sense of belonging, in your cities, in your states, throughout this country. How do you create spaces where Pacific people feel like they are themselves, right? And none of the ways, I think traditional civic engagement has done a huge disservice to our community because it targets individuals, right? It doesn't target the soul of a people, right? And so it's a complex issue for us. I mean, I can tell you my personal commitments about how I'm engaged as an individual, but that does not translate to the ways that we really need to engage our churches, our cultural networks, not just churches. We've got Famatai, we've got Marshallese people that have, their own indigenous chiefly systems that we have to engage critically. I think it's going to take years, even though this process does not stop for us, right? It's like every year there are policies that pass to harm us, and we know that the work that needs to happen is decades long work, right? If not a century, to really change the trajectory of our community. So it's my complex answer, y'all. I'm sorry. I am sorry.
No.
Oh, that's what we need to hear.
You make some really good points about it took a long time to get here where we're at. It's not going to turn around in a year or two. It's going to take a long time to get to where we need to be. So there needs to be long vision. One of the things that we would like to thank for their vision is that logo that's sitting right next to Joseph, the Pacific Islander Center of Primary Care Excellence, PICOPSI. This series is brought to you by them. So we thank them for their vision and providing us the kind of the platform to have our voices heard. Malo, so from your perspective, I like to echo what Joseph said, and I think that there's 250 white people in America. So if 10 million of them don't vote, there's not as big of an impact as if you're a smaller group and you have people that don't vote. There's a bigger impact of non-participation. How do you approach that when you're doing the outreach and the work that you're doing? We want to hear about that, but how do you stress that with Pacific Islanders, that their vote probably means more than a larger group? Even the African black, the black population, there's 13 or 14 million black people. It's a different thing for really small groups like Pacific Islanders.
Thank you for the opportunity, Carl and Naki. Hello, panelists, Joe and Margarita. Just kidding. Just messing with them because Rita had mentioned that there's always a friendly competition between Oregon, Utah, and Washington. But just to piggyback off of what Joe shared, there are different statuses for people. If you're a COFA resident, a migrant that comes to the US, if you are a US national from American Samoa that resides in the US, and then, you just have these different patterns of migration and immigration of Pacific Islanders. We're not a monolith, we definitely have very unique relationships with the US, and that determines our eligibility on whether or not we can vote. So knowing that difference takes a lot of patience and a lot of care when we're speaking to our people. You have many folks that are US nationals that are excited about voting. Your vote counts in Tutuila and Manua. It doesn't apply here in the US. And I think when we talk about the pathway to citizenship for many of our different Pacific Islander groups, that's a long process, right? So in as much as it could be exciting with this idea of living in the United States and earning an income, understanding that the systems here weren't made for us to succeed. And so part of that messaging about a political education is knowing that it takes time, to process your pathway to citizenship, if that's your goal, right? So I think just knowing those differences and nuances, that everybody has their unique narrative as to why they're here in the United States. We talk about building political power, and part of that is understanding that it is going to take some time to help people become citizens so that they can actually vote. So if they're not already on that pathway, or they're not getting that as soon as they come here because, they're coming because they may be a climate refugee, or whatever the circumstance that brings them to the US, um, they're trying to survive from wherever they came from. And so it takes, it takes understanding, um, when people get here, or where they're at in terms of their need, and how do we build that political power. Because again, we're not a monolith. Some Pacific Islanders have been here for generations, right? And so that's one category. And there's other people, who've just got here. And so you can't, there's different programs to which you can help educate people, meeting them where they're at. And I don't know if I answered your question, but when we say, NHPI, we really need to find out, at what point did they come to the US, and where are they at in terms of their migrant status or citizenship status.
Right. Right. So we're all about to go to vote. Like, Margarita, how can we vote safely? Because we are so at risk as a high group. We are the highest at risk population. How do PIs vote safely?
Oh gosh, that is, okay, how do I answer this? I trust our USPS, but for those who don't trust it because of all the stories that they're hearing from on the street about, ballots being dumped in the river, or ballots being thrown in the garbage, the advice that I give them is to take their ballots directly to our elections office, or they can just go stand in line and vote the traditional way, if that makes them feel safer. But I mean, I don't know how else to make people feel safe about their because I can tell them I feel safe about my USPS, but it's really going to be up to the individual how they feel about, whether or not their vote is safe or not. And so I just give them options that will allow them to, give them options other than just mailing in their ballots. Those are two that right off the top of my head that I have been sharing with people in my own community. But yeah.
I think that's a great point. And there's disinformation out there. I was on a podcast or a briefing last week, and it was about disinformation being placed out there purposely. And I just, as you were saying that, it sprung to my mind, and I honestly didn't think about this until just now. Oregon has been mail-in only voting since the mid 90s. And the trust in USPS and the lack of scandal and ballot harvesting and all the things that we hear. So, Malo, can you talk a little bit about a state that's been doing this since the mid 90s?
Yeah, absolutely. I had to debunk a lot of articles, from QAnon that were on relatives' post, about ballot harvesting, ballot tampering. And, for many years, decades, it's been successful here in Oregon. And I know that Washington also has mail-in voting. It is a seamless process. When we talk about how sacred this right to exercise your right to vote, making it as seamless and accessible to a voter is important. You're not missing work. You're taking your time. We just got our ballot last week, and we have to turn it in by October 28th safely through the mail. But we also have options to actually take it to official ballot drop-off points, which every state, if you contact your state, your Secretary of State, they should have those locations available to you if you are a mail-in only state. And I think it's the best thing. And I moved from California to Oregon not too long ago. And I'm like, all we have to do is just mail it in and sign for it, have my signature on the back. And that's really it. Before, we're used to waiting in lines and doing in-person ballot or voting. But since we've been doing it ever since I've been here, it is such a stress-free and convenient way to engage your citizenry, and I think it's a great way.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful way.
it's great to hear from it's great to hear from somebody who's doing it in a state that's been doing it for I mean Clinton or I don't even know who was president in the mid 90s, but it's a long time ago that Oregon's been doing it for a while.
Yeah, Oregon was the first state to go all mail in voting. But how is it in Washington, Joseph?
It's great. I've got my mail-in ballot ready.
And do you also have to sign the back?
I don't. Let me see. No, no signature needed.
You do.
Oh
Wow.
crap! Yeah, signature needed.
Yeah, because I have mine, and it's like you have to sign here, then you've got to sign here, and
Oh
then
yeah, I see it. Yep, I see this form now.
How many signatures do you need, Becky? How many places?
I signed the inside of the envelope,
Uh-huh.
and then when I fold it, I think I just have to I authorize the blah 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 to. There's
Wow.
a signature
Yeah.
area on the outside.
Well, Margaret and Malo, I guess we didn't get the email about, bring props to the show today.
Thank you,
I got mine.
Oh, Rita has hers. I don't have mine. Oh no!
You
It
didn't get
just
the
gets
memo,
worse and
Carl.
worse.
You didn't get the memo.
Our state has finally gone to mail-in voting. Probably in the early, it was like 2012, I think, 12 to 2013.
Mhm.
And ever since I've been filling my ballot out. So when I used to drive by like voting lines and these long lines of people waiting to vote, I'm like, why isn't anyone voting by mail? Why are you doing
Right.
this? Like, it's such an easy process. And it's, again, like Malo said, so sacred. This is such a sacred, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
again, it's the whole going out and just, just fighting against the misinformation and QAnon crap that's out floating around.
I think that's why, the whole, I think it was, and these stats, there's something along the line of these stats I'm about to say. Black people were more likely to wait over an hour. I think 75% more likely to wait over an hour. Whatever the statistics are, I don't have them exact, but you're more likely to wait if you're a person of color. You're more likely to wait longer because of the polling establishments that have been taken out. And so the mail-in voting should be comfortable for us. And it's nice to have two people that are from those states that do it and have done it for a long period of time. It's new to a lot of voters in the United States, but it's not new to Washington. It's not new to Oregon. I think Colorado is another one. There are several states out there that do that. And I think voter access, that's a piece of voter access, and not having voter access is a form of suppression, voter suppression. So I did want to talk a little bit about that and just make sure that we can let our people know how to vote safely, because I think that like Naki said, we're such at high risk because of pre-existing health conditions that we, as much or more than any other group of people, need to know how to vote safely. So that's a good point, that feeling safe with USPS. There's entire states that do all elections like that. Are there any things in terms of PIs that have been surprising to you in the lead up to? I really think this is going to be a huge turnout. I think that the country's galvanized, and people on one side versus people on the other side, this is going to be a big turnout. Is there anything that's been surprising to you three that are in the trenches doing it in terms of the PI community?
I think having the census earlier on was a good segue into building voter registration awareness and also getting out the vote. It was just, I didn't like how willy-nilly it was that the census was going to end, on October 31st, and then it was like September 30th, and then, oh no, like October 5th, and then October 15th. So those pieces, it is what it is. But I think the engagement aspect as to, why we have census and then leading into a major national elections like this, it was a great tool to use to piggyback off of, at least for us in our community. It
And
seemed like a natural progression.
I'll second Malo. I mean, there's, as sad as it sounds, COVID-19 did activate a lot of our NHPI networks, that weren't activated before in a very like a global way, right? And so a lot of these networks that we've opened up just to mitigate the harms of COVID, and also just this newfound energy around disaggregation, right? NHPI disaggregation. I think this is probably the year where you'll see our voting engagement go up, which is really awesome. And yeah, and so like just with also with the food distributions, I think that a lot of the Pacific Islander communities have really stood up a lot of food distribution, because that's the second biggest need for our communities during this time, right? Other than housing and utilities. And so I think these have been events that we've leveraged the census, we've leveraged voting, and our people like to do things, and through events, right? Through community events. We're such a I don't know. It's one of our strengths and also our weaknesses. It's almost like when we vote, you have to make it a family event, right? Everybody 18 and over. This is the day. And then I was actually thinking, one idea that comes up for me is like, like all of us dressing up in our traditional garments and making it, like we're going to church. Let's all dress up, and on the way to the mailbox, wherever. We're doing some chants. We're doing something. We're reading the Psalms 23rd
Right.
for protection.
You're right. It does need to be a family event. In 2008, my triplets are 21. They'll be 22 this year. In 2008, they were 9 years old, and I took them with me to the polls to show them how important it was to vote. And then yesterday, I ended up driving down into the Bay Area to drop off my daughter's ballot, because it had gotten mailed here, and it was that important to her to make sure that she voted. So she was all over my wife and I to find a way to get that ballot to her. So I ended up, Naki and I ended up driving down to her college in the Bay Area yesterday to deliver to her. So I think you're right, like to make it a family event, and they see, long before they could vote, they saw that it was important. And they saw, here's what the polls look like. Here's what, all those kind of things. They all voted. Then they voted since they turned 18. So that's, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think that our Pacific Islanders are going to turn out. The numbers are higher now, because I'm first generation born here for my family, right? My parents came from Samoa, and they didn't care about voting. They were just trying to survive and learn about this new country that they're in. So they really didn't stress to me how important voting is. It's not until I got older and tried to figure out what is going on. And now that I have young adults, I've always stressed to them how important it is to vote, and that, because it's our country and this is where we're going to live. And I think because our generation now understands what is going on, and understands how, a lot of us are not, like the census, we're not counted, so we're not seen. And we've made it so important for us to fill out the census and for us to vote, that my kids know how important it is. Where are my parents and their generation was just not thinking about that, in my opinion. And now that we have the millennials, a lot of the younger kids know more about politics than I ever did at their age. So I truly believe that there's going to be a high number for Pacific Islanders, right? One can only hope, but that's how I see it, is because of we're here now. We're, a lot of kids are getting educated because we weren't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
information travels so fast now. So information traveling that fast? I mean, obviously we see disinformation traveling just as fast too. So it's an advantage and it's a disadvantage. How has that affected your work? So you three, again, you're in the trenches. You're where the rubber meets the ground, rubber meets the road. How is the speed of information working for us or against us?
I mean, a great example would be like COVID, right? We're dealing with COVID, and we're not just dealing with virus. We're dealing with misinformation.
right.
So out of the two, I think the misinformation is a lot worse, because if we had people who actually believe the science and the data that is coming from, our scientists and our researchers and our doctors, maybe our numbers would be a little bit lower. But because they don't believe it, the numbers are skyrocketing, as you can tell. I mean, we continue to, here in Utah, we make up about 1.3% of the total population in Utah, but we carry the highest rate of infections out of all ethnicities here in Utah. So it's similar, right? And having to combat and debunk misinformation, that's hard work. And I also want to bring up my kids. They're horrible because, they vote. And when people ask them about voting, they're like, oh, well, we just, whatever my mom says. Please make an informed decision and stop telling people you're doing it because of me. So debunking these myths and the misinformation out there is not easy. It is not easy, and you really have to question yourself. Like, do you have the capacity and the energy to take that on? So that's me.
Yeah, this is like the biggest challenge, right? Because we often see that there's a lot of abuse that comes from our pastoral leadership in perpetuating, non-scientific, information. And so, how do you leverage the relationships that you have with pastors that are accountable, and are good stewards of information, and do care about the wellness of our communities, over and above the political, religious ideology, right, that oftentimes is being spread in our communities. And so I think, this is where a lot of our Pacific Islanders that, are like activated either through higher education, really need to integrate back with our religious leadership. Because at the end of the day, us in academia can be, high maka maka about like our progressive values. And at the end of the day, if we're not feeding people that are hungry, if we're not housing people, if we're not providing any real provisions for our community, then who's going to, who's going to look at us and see us as leaders, right? And so I think it's, we really, have to do that work of building our communities from the ground up, and pay attention to the people that are, directly in the ears of our folks. And that includes also our young people. Like we've kind of, I mean, a lot of us have not done the work of activating the leadership of our young people, and the influence of our young people to really spread good information, right? So, yeah, it's a big challenge. How do we build those Pacifica religious sort of networks, interfaith networks to communicate responsibly to our folks?
Right. Are there any main points that we want to honor your time? So are there any big points you want to get across to make sure that we vote and vote safely?
Check your mail often, especially if you apply for an absentee ballot. And if you are voting in Oregon, Washington, and Utah, you should have your ballot, and just be mindful of your deadlines of when it's safe to drop your ballot off either via the US Postal Service, and make sure you have a plan in case, you ran out of time and you're a procrastinator like me, and, you know, get inspired at the last minute to start marking your ballot. Just make sure you know where your official ballots are and make a plan on how to get there. Um,
Thank you, Malo.
I think for me, it's all about, voting safely means really digging into policies that your public servants are supporting and making sure that they are championing policies that are not anti-Black, Indigenous, and people of color policies. And the only way that you can do that, and if you don't have the time, reach out to some of your community leaders who are doing the work, like our organization, the Utah Pacific Islander Civic Engagement Coalition. Every year we always put out like policies that we're following that we know have a huge impact on communities of color, like Stand Your Ground, the Stand Your Ground bill, the body cams, the school to prison pipeline bills. Like these are bills that really impact our communities of color, and especially our Pacific Islander communities. So for people to, you want to vote safely, do your homework, find out what type of bills these legislators are supporting, and do they benefit you and your family? Because I can't tell you how many times I've gone into to go and testify in committee hearings during legislative sessions against a bill, that I knew really would cause harm to our people. And I would see legislators from areas that were predominantly people of color, who continue to get voted back into office over and over again, voting for these bills that are going to hurt the constituents they're supposed to serve, and we bring those things to the forefront and have those conversations. But really, if you want to, for me, when you talk about voting safely, do your homework, find out what kind of bills and who's championing these bills and how they impact your communities.
That's a great point, that voting and having your voice heard, you want to have your voice heard for the right thing. So pulling a lever, so to speak, is one thing. Pulling it educated to what you're doing and making the right choices is definitely just as important. So appreciate that. Joseph?
The one thing that well, not one thing, what I would add on is, we're not safe. Pacific Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders lives are killed every day, whether it's directly, like in Washington, we've had 5 young people that were murdered by police in the last 5 years, Pacific Islander young people. We're dying every day to diabetes. We're dying every day to COVID, and also, these systems continue to fail, our folks. And so we're already dying, and we also come from legacies of ancestors that have died for our freedom, right? And I really connect my voting directly to the Mau Samoa movement, where my clan literally put their lives at risk, and half of the clan were wiped out from the Mau Samoa movement for revolution. And so I think about that, and I think about our voting suffrage is really like a sacrifice, and also like an act of courage, right? To be able to really politicize the voice of your ancestors, all those that have come before you, and also politicize the voice of your descendants, right? And so I really echo what Margarita says. There's all of these ways that we're getting killed right now, and so to vote, the act of voting is a courageous act, and I would continue to encourage it.
Thank you, Joseph.
It's so I don't know, it's Naki and I always say this, we always are saying, how do we end up on a show with people like you? How do we end up rubbing shoulders with champions of our community that that do so much, and especially in key times like this? And I think Joseph hit the nail on the head earlier when he said it seems like things have really gotten activated. And maybe it was through COVID-19, maybe it was COVID-19 and then the census and now the election. Like it all, 2020 is a crazy year no matter how you look at it. But it it's amazing to us that we get to sit and spend time with people that are out there making people's lives better. We have that. I've got that in my bio. And when we hear from you and, Joseph saying we can do all these things, but, like food and housing and all those kind of things, it keeps me grounded in what I'm doing. So we appreciate your time today. And we know that all the work that you do, voting is like the seasonal thing, right? And then after November 4th comes and goes, then each of you are going to be on to your next, what is the next key thing and timely thing to inform our community of. And we appreciate everything you do, especially right now, because the voting, I think this will carry over. I think that if we get the message across about how important it is, people are going to remember in the local and the midterms and then the next presidential election, that education carries. So you're educating our community. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure that Koviki Talk, whatever name it turns into after Koviki, that we're going to hear from you all in some other way later. So thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Snacky.
Thank you. I need your weight loss plan.
I know, me too.
I haven't been activated on it lately. So.
Can I bounce out or?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Yeah,
Oh.
we're good to go. Thanks everyone.